So after the lockdowns and other BS that 2020's been throwing at us, cinemas have finally opened up again. And local Australian films have actually been finding a lot of success. The Dry is doing great numbers at box office and High Ground is doing good as well. And yet, when the time came for my birthday, there was one movie I wanted to see. One piece of trash called Monster Hunter.
Ho 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 ho, delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we're going to be delving back into the world of video game cinema. Monster Hunter is a 2020 science fantasy action film based on the video game series by Capcom and directed by Paul W.S, the director of Mortal Kombat, one of the few decent video game film adaptations. But unfortunately, he also made 4 of the 6 Resident Evil films, none of which I can voice my approval on. He did make Event Horizon though, and I previously talked about that as being a very highly underrated science fiction horror movie. When it comes to live action video game films, the only one that I actually consider to be any good is the Sonic the Hedgehog film. I didn't have many major hooks to see Monster Hunter aside from the fact that Tony Jaa was headlining the movie. Now, Tony Jaa was incredible in Ong Bak and Tom Yum-goong, so the thought of him fighting giant CGI monsters, that actually sounded like fun. Prior to seeing Monster Hunter, I'd never played one of the video games before, even though I've actually had Monster Hunter Tri Ultimate on Wii U for a couple of years. I didn't get to give it a shot until after I'd seen the film. And frankly, the film could really not have much less to do with this. Oh, this film is so deep because it found a hidden message in a statement. Yeah, let me do the same thing. She's broken. Sheen. Give me a fucking Oscar. Monster Hunter starts with Tony Jaa and Ron Perlman riding a boat through the sand, and as some creatures begin to attack, Monster Hunter ushers in a wave of sheer pessimism as it shows us the exact editing style that we're in for. This is one of those movies which is cut in such a way that it rarely gives you a chance to take a breath or really comprehend what's going on. An editing style which resembles a machine gun stuck in the auto-fire position. This is the same editing technique used in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, one of the worst science fiction films ever made, and in Armageddon, one of the best bad science fiction movies ever made. Sitting in cinemas seeing this happen, I immediately knew this was not going to be a good film. But it didn't mean that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy myself while watching it. Amid all the chaos, Tony Jaa's character Hunter gets knocked from the boat and left in the sand where he begins to pull an Arthur meme as the title card pops up. And here is the first shot we get after. The only way you can get product placement from Coca-Cola into a science fantasy film is to really just shoehorn it in there. It's always Coca-Cola doing this, just forcing its way into films. The same thing happened with Leonard Part 6 and Mac and Me. What the fuck? Starting off the film with a cliche stare into the distance, we meet our hero, Captain Artemis, played by Paul W.S. Anderson's wife, Millie Jovovich. Now, she has consistently proven herself to be a pretty solid action hero, but the way that they shoehorn her into this story, well, it would make you think that...
Lady only here cause she humping director.
Also, they named her Artemis because that was the ancient Greek goddess of the hunt. Hunt. Monster Hunter. It's so fucking deep. Through a series of quick cut shots, we learn that she's commanding the Alpha team to go out searching for their missing Bravo team of soldiers.
All right, ladies, saddle up.
She's a woman, but she still manages to make that sound like an insult.
I really don't think the writers actually had the knowledge to decide whether that was an insult or a compliment, and they just kind of copped out. Amid the search, a storm of black smoke comes their way.
Where the hell did that come from?
Just came out of nowhere.
Bravo team reported a storm in their last transmission.
Hostiles using it for cover. An ambush, like in Hellman?
But let's not find out.
We don't pause between each other's sentences, we start talking immediately after the other person finishes. In a scene which seems to be very much plagiarized from Mad Max Fury Road, the storm converges over their vehicle, which causes some runes to act up.
You know what it is, bitch.
They crash in a series of quick cut flashing lights that are bound to discombobulate you and easily trigger seizures if you suffer from epilepsy. And they really draw it out until the storm disappears.
Guys,
You okay?
I'll survive.
I doubt it.
Where'd all this sand come from?
It's a desert, dickhead. Where do you think?
This isn't right, none of it.
Oh, really? What was your first guess?
According to this, the nearest sand dune is 20 clicks away.
How's that possible?
Well, first of all, through God, all things are possible, so jot that down.
Where the hell are we? How do we get so far from the road?
Too many questions.
Boss,
Send it.
something you gotta see.
And it definitely ain't this film. They stumble across the remains of the Bravo team with evidence of burns at a temperature beyond what even napalm is capable of.
It's glass. When sand melts, it turns to glass.
How do you melt sand?
With high temperature flames, you fucking idiot. This is basic science.
This shit is officially above my pay grade.
Most things are. Soldiers really aren't well paid.
We need to get moving.
Yeah, you really do. The story's at a standstill right now, Captain.
This isn't right. Nothing about this is right.
Including the writer's insistence on having the characters say the same lines again and again. While singing a tedious military chant, Hunter spots them from a distance. While they stop to study what appears to be giant bones, Hunter shoots a red-dusted arrow at them, triggering the natural American response.
I started blasting. Bang! Bang! No, I don't see so good, so I missed. Then they ran away.
On our six!
What the hell is that?
What is that and what the hell is that gets said quite a few times throughout this film. I had to actually stop myself from saying the words, you know what it is, bitch, in cinemas each time. An unseen creature begins to give chase to them, which eventually knocks them over before rearing its head, revealing itself as a Diablo. And the creature's design is impressive. Monster Hunter's budget was only $60 million, which is a fairly low sum considering the nature of the film. It's 2/3 the budget of Bad Boys for Life, so they spend money pretty well with this movie.
Holy...
PG movie, people. Everyone gets back on the car as the creature gives chase.
It's gaining on us!
He's gaining on us! I'm scared!
The Diablo knocks them over and impales one of the soldiers, who takes the opportunity to pull his grenade pins and bomb the monster. While the soldiers fall back, Hunter pulls a Rambo 2 and hits the Diablo with an explosive arrow, distracting the monster as the soldiers hide in a cave. It turns and runs while the soldiers whip up in a frenzy.
What is that?
See? I warned ya.
We're gonna die here.
Yeah, probably.
Set that shit up right now, soldier. What it is, soul brother?
Unfortunately, they get accosted by the arachnid-like Nescullers in a cave as the film turns into an unironic version of Starship Troopers.
They'll soon be back, and in greater numbers.
The work of the visual effects team is buried under a grim colour scheme and tedious amount of shadow in this scene, which makes the sight of these monsters converging on the soldiers a bit less stellar than it could have been. After passing out, Artemis wakes up in the middle of the creature's nest. So now we're borrowing from Alien. Yeah, this isn't the first time Paul W.S. Anderson did that. Event Horizon was very derivative of that movie. Come on, man, find some new material. And this continues as Artemis finds one of her soldiers experiencing a collection of baby Nescullers birthing themselves like chestbursters. And if you swap soldiers for special police force and monsters for zombies, this film has the exact same plot as the Resident Evil video game, which Anderson adapted to the screen in 2002, even though he changed the premise so much that it was completely unfaithful to the source material. So in a way, Monster Hunter is kind of more faithful to Resident Evil than the Resident Evil films. What the fuck is that about? Artemis acts with improvised weaponry.
Hey, yo, this shit on fire! Burn, baby, burn! Disco Inferno, burn, baby, burn!
She emerges from the cave and finds refuge from the monsters in the sunlight as the camera pans out to reveal the landscape. And there is a huge surplus of these shots in the film. This is at least the third one so far. Artemis pulls out a ring which suggests that she has someone waiting for her at home and apparently excusing the writers from actually giving her any character development. Seriously, this moment here, this is the full extent of substance that she gets in the film. We also get the cliche soldier healing themselves from injuries through pain shot, and then yet another widescreen tracking shot. After some tedious wandering around, she finds the remains of several ships where she finally encounters Hunter and the two duke it out in a fight which resembles everything wrong with modern action films in Hollywood. The film takes the talents of Milla Jovovich and Tony Jaa, then buries them under a grim whirlwind of excessive quick cuts, way too many of which fail to flow with the previous shot they cut from, and thus create a very jarring visual experience. This is most frustrating when you compare it to Tony Jaa's work in Tom Yum-Goong, where he participated in one of the most visually impressive one-take fight scenes ever to gross the screen. And now that Hollywood is finally making use of him, they're doing everything they can to butcher his talents. Just like Mile 22, Rambo Last Blood, Taken 2, and Taken 3, Monster Hunter is a big fuck you to people who appreciate the art and integrity of actual good fight scenes. Amid all the horrendous cutting, you can still see Jaa do some pretty good moves, but it adds up to very little. Hunter emerges victorious and ties Artemis up, bringing her back to his shelter. We wait around for a while as Artemis slowly cuts through the rope and Hunter is sure to hydrate himself, as well as chanting at some little statues that we later learn represent his family. And then Artemis gets up the next morning and turns the table on him. But he still vehemently refuses to let her hydrate herself. It's worth noting at this point that she's gone 2 days without water or food and she shows no signs of dehydration or struggle whatsoever. Like, I know these films aren't meant to be realistic, but still. She also tries to destroy his little statues, triggering Hunter to get up and fight Artemis again in a scene which now not only has awful cutting, but shoddy lighting too. Seriously, it looks like the fight scenes are just progressively going to get worse throughout this movie. The only time in this fight where I felt particularly amused is when Tony Jaa did the run-up-the-wall backflip, because it reminded me of the time that Homer fought George Bush Sr. in that episode of The Simpsons. The fight causes Hunter to almost fall into the Nesculla nest before Artemis pulls him out. And now that they've got a common enemy, suddenly they're on the same side.
I'm gonna kick your fucking ass! Why don't you try it, asshole? Get your ass up here and kick my ass! Shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch! Get the fuck back already! There's a classy neighborhood people trying to sleep! God damn it! Fuck up! Hey, I'm really sorry. Yeah, me too. She's worse than us. Yeah, she's our enemy now.
Artemis also helps their relationship by injecting some product placement in there. And this scene right here is a very special level of cringe. She went 2 days without food and water, and not at one point did she stop and think, yeah, I should probably eat that Hershey's bar that I totally have in my pocket. Also, it didn't melt this entire time, even though she's been out in the fucking desert. And thirdly, what kind of product placement is that? Like, there's no subtlety. That is shameless. The last time I saw a film where a character randomly pulled chocolate out after surviving extensively rough conditions for a long period was in Cannibal the Musical.
Oh, wait! I got some fudge.
But see, this film actually had a reason for doing this. It was for the sake of a joke.
Fudge packer.
See, they actually thought it through. With Monster Hunter, it seems like the writers penned the entire script and suddenly were like, oh, fuck, we definitely need some product placement to get a bit more money. We can put it there. Like, yeah, that'll be okay. That won't make any sense, but that's okay.
Pathetic humans.
Also, this scene marks the start of a gag where Hunter uses the word chocolate to refer to any kind of food, and this epitomizes something very wrong with this film. The two main characters don't speak the same language, which saves the writers the trouble of actually giving them any substantial dialogue. Instead, just using this for the sake of comic relief regarding the language barrier between the two. Not only is the story in this film derivative and basic, but the characters are less than one-dimensional because they can't even communicate with each other.
I have weapons. Diablos.
Monster Hunter is really a very special kind of lazy writing. Through the use of body language, Hunter tells Artemis that the poison from the nest scholars can stop the Diablos, so Artemis is used as bait to draw the bug beast out as Hunter traps it with rope before coming in with a classic slow-motion sword jump, bisecting its head.
Next time, you're bait!
I didn't understand anything she just said.
Then a bunch of other nest scholars attack and the scene just ends. They brought out all these monsters, which is obviously going to present a challenge for two people who have to run for their life, and then they're just going to cut right there. See, that's cinematic blue balls. That's a big insult to audiences. After inexplicably getting back to Hunter's shelter, she tries to teach him some English as the monsters swarm, unable to penetrate the walls. And that never amounts to anything, so that shot was just pointless.
Let's do this. Never mind. Let's go.
Just stop. I'd rather you have no verbal interactions with each other than whatever the hell this poor excuse for writing is. We get a montage of the two rigging the shipyard with a catapult, and Artemis training with a wristband crossbow and dual blade.
What is that?
Say something else.
They use the catapult to launch a barrel into the sand to attract a Diablo, but I have to say that a trebuchet would have been way better. It really is a superior medieval siege engine. And while the Diablo is distracted, they venture towards Alpha Team's vehicle to claim the weapons. The Diablo attacks Hunter, who shoots a poison-laced arrow directly into its eye before Artemis hits it with a chain gun. She also hits it with a missile launcher, but that does jack squat. Hunter sticks his blade into the creature's head, but even that falters. After pulling the Artemis herself, Artemis uses her wristband crossbow to grapple her way up to the creature's head and to plunge the blade deeper, killing the beast.
See you later, you big motherfucker.
After an extended period of walking through the desert, the two arrive at a tropical oasis.
Abstros.
Okay, they eat grass.
Ah, same, I'm a vegan. After Hunter kills a creature from the waterside, he starts cooking meat. Because remember how that's a thing you do in the game, cooking your own meat? Yeah, this film may not have been faithful when it came to shoving military soldiers into the story, but at least we got to see Tony Jaa cook some meat.
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
Oh, I get it. I get jokes.
That night, a dragon creature attacks the oasis, staring the local vegan monsters into creating a stampede. But in comes Ron Perlman to save them by waving fire around.
Thank you.
Don't thank me yet.
And I want to tell you exactly what happened the moment this scene played out in the cinema. Everyone laughed. Yeah, an unexpected moment of violence against women triggered everyone in the audience to just laugh their asses off. And that's just wrong, because violence against women is not funny. But amid all the confusion of what the hell was going on in the story, where Ron Perlman came from, why he could suddenly speak English, the fact that out of the blue he just punched her for reasons that just didn't make sense at that point in time, all we could do was laugh. And the fact that we laughed made this my favorite scene in the film. So, my favorite scene in the film is a random moment of violence against women, which is completely wrong. And I laughed at it with everyone else. That is just fucking awful. And that says everything about Monster Hunter. Also, considering that Ron Perlman was the star of the good Hellboy films and Milla Jovovich was the star of the awful reboot, there's almost a wonderful symbolism here. Almost. Artemis wakes up in a cage, which she promptly escapes before encountering one of the anthropomorphic cat creatures. Having played the game, let me say, I fucking hate those felines. They robbed me and left me for dead, twice. Looks like they tried to work Salt Bay into the narrative as well. You know, it didn't work for Glass, and it certainly isn't gonna work now. That meme has been dead for years.
Why did you put me in chains?
How about you ask why he can speak English? That's the question that's on everyone's minds, Artemis.
What are you so afraid of?
Everything! Dogs, Dutchmen, the gathering darkness!
His character, named the Admiral, tells her that people from her world crossed over to his a long time ago due to the power of the Sky Tower, and apparently the technology of our world led to a downfall of an ancient civilization. We're given a few sentences here to sum up some kind of convoluted narrative, and I don't get it, but I really just don't care anymore. I don't give a fuck. I've just accepted that sheer confusion is an inherent part of the narrative.
The ancients would guard their technology with the most fearsome of creatures, a Rathalos. Almost impossible to kill. Their only weakness is just before they breathe fire. You help us with the battle ahead, perhaps we can help you get home.
Yeah, but could you be more specific as to what their weakness is? Don't just tell us the time that their weakness shows itself, tell us what their weakness is and how you can stop them. I mean, hello, can we get some detail?
Apparently not. We leave at dawn. Don't keep me waiting. I hate waiting.
And I hate mediocre storytelling. They journey to the Sky Tower where they meet the Rathalos, which also has an awesome design. Since battling this beast is a matter of CGI and not realistic violence, the editing in this scene is actually a lot smoother. The hunters all charge at the Rathalos and attack it all from different directions, but all they do is attack it and not really face any challenge. This battle is very brief, and it just leads to Artemis getting pinned to the edge of a cliff.
Jump! Beacon! Jump!
Artemis leaps into the portal and returns to our world, meeting with the military. Naturally, we know things aren't over yet because the Rathalos hasn't been defeated, so the fact that this film is pretending otherwise is just pathetic. Still, most of the storytelling decisions have been, so this is no surprise. Amid being transported to safety, the Rathalos rock up and attack the transport, causing it to crash. But of course, Artemis survives it just fine. As the Rathalos unleashes carnage on the military around it, Artemis steps up and unleashes an explosive into the creature's mouth, causing it to burn up from the inside. After surviving that, Hunter rocks up and pummels the creature with explosive arrows until it finally dies. But in comes another one through the portal.
We have to shut the Sky Tower down.
As the characters all launch into an assault on the other Rathalos, the film ends the same way as The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It just cuts before the attack can even start, leaving the audience with blue balls yet again. And you can see it coming a mile away, but it doesn't make it any less disappointing. Is Monster Hunter a good film?
No!
Monster Hunter is a film which has been made by someone who has not learned from their mistakes from previous films, because just like Event Horizon, it's incredibly derivative from a lot of other movies, and just like Resident Evil, it's incredibly unfaithful to its source material. It's so messy and jumbled that in the end, it's almost kind of hilarious. Monster Hunter borrows elements from Starship Troopers, Alien, Mad Max Fury Road, and the premise of the Resident Evil video game into one generic fantasy adventure. It takes the editing style of Armageddon during the dramatic dialogue sequences, and the editing style of the Taken sequels during the fight scenes before borrowing the ending from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Monster Hunter will remind you of much better films and much worse films, but not at one point will it show you any flair of originality. But still, I didn't go into this film expecting originality. I went in because I wanted to see Tony Jaa hunt down a bunch of giant CGI monsters. Unfortunately, it even delivered very little of that. Monster Hunter has solid production values and great visual effects, but the editing and the lighting often hinder the film as a visual experience, which is the only area where it's really destined to succeed. The soundtrack is nice, and there is some great scenery captured by widescreen tracking shots, but there is also a heavy abundance of those shots. When it comes to the action scenes, there is a modicum of enjoyment to be had watching these characters fighting the kaiju, but the action scenes are often way too brief, or cut completely short to the dissatisfaction of the audience. And when the characters are fighting each other, the talents of the actors are wasted on an editing team who really want that PG-13 rating at the expense of viewer satisfaction. Piece of advice, Hollywood: stop doing that to action films, and don't fucking do it when it's a Tony Jaa film. He deserves way better than that. The plot to Monster Hunter is formulaic and often unexplained or just convoluted. And not only is there no character development, but the language barrier prevents any kind of meaningful relationship forming between the quote-unquote characters. In the Monster Hunter video game, everyone can communicate with each other easily. It seems like the writers just shoved in a protagonist who's an American military soldier so they could get away with writing less dialogue, and also so that they could do less universe building. It's kind of like the cheap tactic they did when the makers of the Masters of the Universe film brought the characters from a fantasy world to Earth because it was much cheaper. That's just... you know, it didn't work for that film. It's not going to work for Monster Hunter. Still, this film definitely has more integrity than Masters of the Universe. Monster Hunter should have had a simple narrative where Hunter was the protagonist and his crew were the other heroes. That's who we're interested in, not some random soldier dropped in there. The video games have a pretty simple premise. Hunters venturing through a fantasy world, killing monsters. The fact that the creators of the film couldn't even make the film focus on that, when that is the basic premise, that goes to show just how little integrity Hollywood has when it comes to making video game films. And yet, sadly enough, this is still one of the best live-action video game films in my opinion. It's messy, it's all over the place, it's generic, but it's not loud and aggressive with its badness. Minus those fight scenes, of course. The rest of the time, it's just kind of mediocre. And at least it has a decent cast. Milla Jovovich's character has no place in the story, no substance, no value whatsoever, but she plays the role just fine and makes a convincing action hero. Tony Jaa doesn't speak a word of English in the film, yet he manages to wring a few moments of comedy out of the language barrier while flexing his awesome physical talents even beneath the horrendous editing. And Ron Perlman is perfectly cast as always. The man can work in any genre and pull it off. If he can give a decent performance in a sorry excuse for a film like In the Name of the King, A Dungeon Siege Tale, then he's got no problem in Monster Hunter. Honestly, I just wish we got to see more of him. I enjoyed him in this movie. It's also worth noting that Monster Hunter got banned in China because of a cutscene where the character played by Asian American rapper MC Jin refers to his knees as Chinese, and Chinese audiences saw this as a reflection of the racist playground chant, Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. Now, if audiences over in mainland China are offended by this, they deserve to have their opinion heard. It's also worth noting that audiences in mainland China are offended by people of color and gay people, which is why in the poster for Star Wars The Force Awakens, they minimized the size of John Boyega, and which is why in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, they pretty much cut him from the film. It's also the reason that Bohemian Rhapsody had almost no homosexuality in it whatsoever. So, China is a bit sensitive when it comes to these issues. Now, having spoken with Chinese citizens over in Australia, I don't know a single Chinese person who has a problem with black people, who has a problem with homosexuality. Honestly, the Chinese citizens over in Australia I know, they have a bigger problem with the fact that over in China, 1.5 million Muslims are being kept in a concentration camp in Xinjiang. But apparently, the Chinese government doesn't find anything wrong with that. They find something wrong with referring to your own knees as Chinese if you're a Chinese person, but yeah, concentration camps, that's just fine. Well, with all due respect to the Chinese government,
your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
Monster Hunter gets 4 Chinese out of 10. It has some very solid production value, some decent imagery, and a modicum of fun in some of the action scenes. Unfortunately, they aren't enough to make up for its lack of ideas or originality, the general lazy screenwriting, and some horrendous editing. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If you want to see more episodes of this show, please hit that subscribe button. If there are any movies you want to see me discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, until next time, I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.